Hi, I'm Matthias, and this is the Colt's automatic pistol caliber .455 Webley, a British contract Colt 1911. We'll cover both this and Colt's other foreign contracts after we get a closer look in the light box. These dimensions should seem familiar by now, 8.5 inches long and with a weight averaging around 2.38 pounds in the .455 configuration. This of course still feeds from a 7-round magazine, albeit wider, for the aforementioned British automatic cartridge. Before we get started, don't forget that the world's best do-all service oil of the Great War is still a champion when it comes to the preservation and lubrication of collectible firearms. While there are plenty of competitors, only Ballistol has over 100 years of certifiable success, never harming metal or wood, never hardening, and always leaving a smooth, protective finish. We've been using this product for years, essentially the entire life of the show, but very recently they've become a supporter of our efforts to preserve the history as well as the firearm itself. Even so, the majority of our work is made possible not by a little help from Ballistol, but from you. So consider joining us on Patreon or Player, gaining access to our behind-the-scenes updates, early episode releases, and if you choose to, a historical scan every month. If you can't do any of this, thank the people who did, because that's the only way that this show is possible. While I started this episode with a British Service .455 automatic pistol, we're actually going to cover Colt's patent firearms foreign sales all the way through the Great War. Now, Colt had long sought a foreign market for their handguns. Samuel himself had tried repeatedly to breach the British market in particular, though he was constantly stymied by commercial and political efforts from Birmingham. Even after Samuel's death, this effort continued. We even saw the development of a large caliber solid frame double action pistol specifically for the British interest in our episode on the Model 1878 revolver. Even so, this too failed. As Colt entered the realm of automatics, they remained committed to making sales abroad. Versions of the Colt 1905 were sent to the British authorities, who were very curious about the compact 45 ACP handgun. They were, after all, in the camp of bigger bullets do more work. At this time, they were using the Webley Mark IV revolver and the .455 service cartridge. Sadly for Colt, and really anybody else, the British Army wasn't that much interested in automatics at that time. However, the Navy managed to kind of keep that can kicking on down the road for a few years to come. In the meantime, Colt's vice president, Frank Nichols, felt it was wise to find more potential buyers abroad. He and his sales manager, Samuel Stone, made a trip across Europe in 1909 with the goal of establishing a European sales organization. These efforts spread out in various ways depending on the market. Samuel Stone would manage to make strong connections with Russia in that same year. Frank Nichols also managed a meeting with Fabrique Nationale in Belgium in 1910. This was of course the company that held the rights to John Browning's pistol patents in Europe. Unlike Colt, who had been focusing tightly on sales to the US government, FN was the first company to fully develop Browning's pistol potential, resulting in the extremely successful FN 1900 pocket pistol. This was followed by the Marshall blowback model of 1903, the diminutive commercial vest pistol, and very recently at that time, the model of 1910 improved pocket pistol. These had, frankly, tremendously more sales than the Colt endeavors so far. However, as we saw in our 1909 episode, by 1910, Colt was on track with an excellent locked breech Marshall handgun, which would ultimately become the Colt model of 1911. While this was adopted in the US, it wasn't quite breaching the British market, so it was time to turn again towards Europe. There's just one problem with that though. John Moses Browning and his brother had carefully split their patents between FN and Colt by the territory affected. Each firm had contracts with the Brownings, but not necessarily with each other. The matter needed a little cleaning up. So Colt and FN came to an agreement signed July 1st of 1912, which solidified their various territories and the terms by which they could break those boundaries. Colt was given North and Central America, which was defined as north of the Panama Canal. This includes, but is not limited to, Greenland, Newfoundland, St. Pierre and Miquelon, Mexico, Guatemala, Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Bermuda, Bahama, Come On Pretty Mama, Jamaica, etc., the French Antilles, Dutch Antilles, and you wouldn't believe this, the Danish Antilles. They also held rights to the British market, including Ireland and the like. FN received Europe as a whole. Notably, South America remained in play to either. Provisions were made for royalty payments from one company to the other for commercial sales in the other's region. Sort of. These seem to have focused on FN paying Colt, as Colt was making more of a contracts pistol, and FN was just pumping out tons of commercial pocket pistols. Still, for now, the borders were agreed upon. Frankly, where they had always been thus far, just now in stone. Meaning Colt kept Britain, well, technically Browning still had the right to sell directly to the Crown, but that didn't really come up in the way things played out. Colt's involvement in the British pistols trials would carry on into August of 1910, when a then-current prototype was fielded against an offering from Webley and Scott. From the recorded dimensions, I suspect that this was a model of 1909. Unlike the US trials, this apparently suffered quite a few stoppages, most of which were blamed on extraction, though I'm curious if this was actually an ejector issue, as we saw with exactly one sample in the US. The gun was also prone to discharging when dropped on hard ground at just the right angle. Ultimately, Webley's pistol prevailed, though its adoption was rather limited, and frankly, that came with a huge fight. British Naval Ordnance had wanted to essentially reserve an automatic pistol design and only order it once they needed it, which is frankly insane and explains a lot about the death of the British small arms industry. Webley and Scott had to fight to get their pistol actually officially adopted in 1912. That means it arrived only just in time to avoid having to compete directly with the finished model of 1911 from Colt, which was just entering serial production at that time. Now sadly for Webley, despite all this, fairly small numbers of their pistol were ordered. Thankfully, this did provide enough momentum to further secure, well, even smaller orders from the Army with the Royal Horse Artillery model. Again, not a very profitable endeavor, but it did lock out the competition. It also managed to lock in the adoption of the .455 automatic cartridge based on the .455 revolver cartridge's performance. Again, both the Colt and the .45 ACP cartridge were left out in the cold. With Britain out of the running, the first foreign contracts would actually come from the neutral zone in South America. That's because in 1910, the Argentine Navy commissioned 2 battleships in the United States. These were, of course, part of the South American dreadnought race. The Rivadavia, constructed by the Four River Shipbuilding Company of Quincy, Massachusetts, and the Moreno, assembled by the New York Shipbuilding Company of Camden, New Jersey. These ships required Argentina to send numerous naval officials to the United States to oversee, inspect, and train. Now, the established pattern in Argentina was already a little out of whack. Usually, the Army chose the service handgun. In 1906, this had been decided to be the Mannlicher model of 1905, a pistol that we've actually covered before on this show. However, it seems that the Navy never caught up to this particular automatic. They were actually still using revolvers, specifically Colt's model of 1895, adopted years before when it was contemporary for the US Navy. In attempting to now outfit their new ships with pistols, they likely found that the 1895 was well out of production. All of the new Navy and new Army patterns had been abandoned, as had the .38 long Colt revolver cartridge. Unfortunately, information on how they selected the 1911 over, say, maybe like an Army special revolver in .38 Special is apparently lost to time. But as the ships were finishing up and being kitted out, contracts appeared. 200 pistols were shipped on April 11th of 1914, 100 to each ship. These were marked on the slides, Marina, Argentina. In November, before she sailed, another 120 were sent to the Rivadavia, likely intended to be taken home for other Argentine naval units. Now that same ship wouldn't reach Buenos Aires until February of 1915. Shortly thereafter though, the Army actually became interested in this new .45, and by the end of 1915, they were in negotiations with Colt's patent firearms. In 1916, 1,000 more pistols would ship. These contracts were handled through the London Armoury Company in England. Now, I've seen it reported that this was due to the Colt and FN agreement, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Instead, it's more likely that because Argentina arranged the funding and contracts through British banking services, the fact that they lacked direct banking options in the US is probably why we go through a London agency. There are no signs of British proofs on any of the guns, and it would be silly to ship them back and forth, especially with the war in Europe now underway. The pistols were sold direct, and the contracts were in a triangle. Post-war, there would be further orders, 400 shipped in May of 1919, and another 6 in April of 1920. Now, because of the Army's 1916 adoption, this guy, to the Argentinians, is a Modelo 1916. It's not a perfect example, but let's get a closer look. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody to see that this is a 1911 pistol. This particular example has been refinished, so we no longer have some of the fine blue we would have seen in the period. And actually, this individual gun saw a number of upgrades and has been refitted back into its original configuration almost. We have one little adjustment to make here. That is a much handier beaver tail than we would see on a period piece. It'd probably be down in here somewhere, and it would be biting up the web of my hand because I got fat fingers. But this was convenient in at hand because it belongs to our animator, Bruno. So thank you, Bruno, for the loan. Now, early Argentine Colts, the ones bought out of the USA, are just commercial series pistols. So if we flip this guy over, we're going to see a C prefix serial number. Charlie 200, and in this case 34. Now these pistols were actually sold from 20,001 to 21,000 in one sequential lot, at least this particular set. And because of that, it allowed them to use the last 3 digits as their own sequential numbers for inventory back home. In this case, we have a 0 leading, so 034, which means that this gun would actually be recorded as 34. We can see that when we look at the top of the gun. Up top, we have what's left of a beautiful Argentine crest. Actually, quite a bit of it remains. These were a little shallow and tend to disappear readily as the guns age, and they saw a lot of service. Below is our inventory number for Argentina, in this case the last 2 digits of the serial number because it had a leading 0. In this contract, if there had been number 134, we actually would have had the 1 over here. It would have been the last 3 digits. By 1919's contract, these no longer had sequential serial numbers, and therefore 4 digits would be placed in this spot. Later on, the full serial number would be added to the chamber. Now, this particular pistol has a magazine of unknown origin. It's probably something domestic to Argentina. These pistols were in service for a very long time. However, it is not unheard of to find one with a serial marked magazine that's matched the pistol. This one's not. Originally, each pistol would have come with, as according to the documents I have, 3 magazines. I'm not sure how long that remained the standard, though. Later, in the late 40s or early 50s, a lot of these pistols were marked on the slide with their full serial number as well. This was in order to bring them into the same pattern as the domestically produced 1911 A1 variant, known here as the Sistema 1927. This is a pistol that we are not currently covering. We'll have to talk about this another day, after we talk about the A1. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the United States remained for a time firmly neutral. As we've covered before, this manifested as an unwillingness to expand its own army beyond some fairly nominal growth. That meant that there was no immediate pressure on Colt's patent firearms to provide the 1911 for domestic sale. This left them wide open to supply those abroad who were now in desperate need of, well, handgun. Britain's small volunteer army was insufficient, and the call-out went for more help. The then Dominion of Canada would respond as they had done many times before. The result on this occasion was the Canadian Expeditionary Force, formed immediately after Britain's declaration of war on Germany in August of 1914. The sudden call-up of a new army, of course, meant an immediate need for equipment. At the start, this meant the use of their domestic Ross rifles, though that's a whole story unto itself that we covered long ago. Canada, however, did not have a domestic pistol option. So, as they had done before, they turned to Colt. Prior to this, it had been the 1878, rapidly snapped up thanks to pressure from the Northwest Rebellion of 1885. Then, for the Boer War, it was the Colt New Service, which actually went on to serve their Mounties in both 4.55 Webley and 45 Colt. Now, with the start of World War I, it was going to be the Colt 1911 that was ordered. These were purchased from normal US commercial production, so they don't have any special marks and can only be identified by their specific serial numbers against Colt's records. They were not even sequential. 5 lots were shipped between September 11th and November 14th of 1914, totaling some 5,000 pistols, the first 2,000 of which were shipped to the government of Canada's Department of Militia and Defense via Waddington, New York. The remaining 3,000 were sent direct to H.W. Brown of Quebec. Those pistols shipped out with Canadian forces, providing much-needed immediate relief in the war. The same would be true, by the way, for the United Kingdom. Colt's representative, the London Armoury Company, began moving units at the start of the war. By the books, British officers who purchased their own sidearms had to select one in a government cartridge. Now, that means 4.55 Webley revolver or the 4.55 Webley automatic cartridge. But in practice, with the pressure on, just make sure you bring enough of your own ammo. These 1911s were sold through sources like Wilkinson Sword and Wesley Richards. Fun fact, Winston Churchill would buy his own model 1911 pistol privately, serial number C15566, purchased after he was dropped from his post as First Lord of the Admiralty and joined the Western Front. British government contracts can be a bit weird, mostly when we're discussing the original 45 ACP examples of the Colt pistol. The only recorded purchase was by the Navy. 57 commercial examples were bought up from the trade for use by the Royal Naval Air Service. These pistols likely coincide with the purchase of a small number of unique magazines. These were massively extended mags produced by Frederick Beasley, a London gunmaker. They were fitted with a heavy lanyard ring and bore his company's name on a large brass plaque. A pair of magazines could be carried in a leather holster designed to fit something like a Sam Browne belt. While interesting, this little 57 pistol order was hardly sufficient, however, to justify the number of cartridges that are found in various ad hoc ordnance documents later on. In 1917, there were 2 requests totaling 608,000 rounds for service in France. A note from September indicates a request for 135,000 rounds a month of 45 ACP. This is likely because 1911s were being used by British frontline troops, as the pistol was an excellent tool for trench combat. Sadly, much of this information is now lost, likely buried in accounts that just reference my pistol. From Colt's records, it seems around 4,200 commercial government model 45 ACP pistols shipped to England. It's likely a great many of these found their way into martial use. It's just really hard to pick up where they landed in British records. Despite the mysteries around the old 45, we know a bit more about what came next. In January of 1915, J.P. Morgan & Company of New York was signed to act as the purchasing agents for the British government. They sourced, arranged, and shipped all of the British arms needs. They would later sign the same for the French and arrange a loan of $500 million to both of these countries. Around the spring of 1915, Colt's patent firearms were asked if they could provide the government model pistol in .455 Auto, the same cartridge as the aforementioned Webley self-loading pistol. This was thankfully a fairly simple task, which resulted in, let's see, I put it here, the pistol that we started with today. So let's finally take a closer look at what they did to achieve that. From the outside, ignoring the markings, again, we have another commercial Colt's government model pistol. Nothing is different about this from any other 1911 we've seen, and the finish, as a matter of fact, should be appropriate to the period it was produced by Colt's. But we do find something a little different if we pay attention to what's been marked on the gun, and also if we got out a pair of calipers. But let me show you what I mean. The most obvious marking, straight from Colt's, is on this side. Our government model is marked with a W instead of a C. This is believed to stand for the Webley cartridge, the .455 automatic, although this serial number remains the same as if it was in the commercial series. So W and C are totally interchangeable in terms of how these numbers count up, and the British contracts were not delivered sequentially. Looking at the base of the pistol, on the bottom of our magazine, we have caliber .455 Ely, as in the Ely brothers. These were, of course, ammunition manufacturers and suppliers. It's kind of wild that even within the gun, it's internally inconsistent, because we have Webley marked on the gun and Ely marked on the magazine. And yet, that's not all that unusual. Most Colts that were in .455 were marked .455, or sorry, I should say Colt revolvers in .455 were marked .455 Ely on their barrels. So this is an old tradition for them. It's actually more unusual that something else showed up on the serial prefix. It also could be explained by the fact that these may have been subcontracted and nobody was comparing notes as well as they should have in the middle of a war. While we're looking at the magazine, we can see one of the few actual mechanical differences between this and, say, a commercial 1911. Let me see if I can line these guys up. It's going to be hard to perceive, but take my word for it, one of these holes is a little wider than the others. If you pay close attention to the thickness here on the frame, you might be able to make it out. This had to be opened up just a bit, see it? Just a bit, in order to clear the .455 cartridge, which means that the magazine itself is also slightly different from the .45 ACP. Another physical difference can be found at the rear of the barrel. This is .455 auto, this is .45 ACP. If you look closely, and I can pop a photo, you'll see that there's a little relief cut in order to make room for the semi-rim of the .455 auto cartridge. Because the frame now had a different magazine opening, it also had to be marked during manufacture to make sure that there was no confusion. In this case, it was marked with a big letter E, which I guess means Ely, like the magazine, but not W on the side like Webley. Okay, sure, well, E. I mean, this one's almost an F, but it was an E. Now, that's about it for the differences. Nothing in terms of an operational change. As a matter of fact, you'd be lucky to notice the difference between this and a .45 ACP regular Colt unless you're loading the thing. There's going to be no need for an animation or extra details beyond what we've seen on the table. However, we are shooting a new cartridge, so why not let May take a spin with it and see if she can pick anything up. Shipments of this little guy began in July of 1915. Despite their unique prefix, they shared the same serial range as the commercial sales pistols. They just replaced the C with the little W. So once again, these were not consecutive in British service. The first 600 came through the London Armoury Company. From there, they shipped on to the British War Office. These would eventually total some 2,800 pieces, likely all before April of 1917. Which is when the US entered the war, putting Colt on a path of domestic production just when the UK was really getting addicted to the handy .455 autos. Colt had to tell the British Ministry of Munitions and War that they would be unable to deliver after October 1st. The British in turn contacted the US government requesting a minimum of 300 a month be allowed through. Problem is, Colt had a delivery schedule to meet with the US, and when they fell behind, fines would stack up. The US government relented, even as the number on request rose to 400 a month. It was negotiated that this 400 unit a month being given to Britain, would not count against Colt's fines for shortfalls to the US government. This allowed for another 500 pistols to ship in October and November, followed by, finally, a formal contract in November of 1917 for 5,000 pistols. These sold for $16.19 each, plus 15,000 extra magazines at a cost of 67.5 cents each. Delivered at a rate of 400 pistols and 1,200 magazines a month. In May of 1918, another 10,000 pistols and 30,000 magazines were ordered to be delivered at a rate of 600 pistols per month. The 5,000 unit order wrapped in November of 1918, and the additional 10,000 order was cancelled, though deliveries were allowed into April of 1919, making for a delivery of 5,000 pistols from that lot and 24,000 spare magazines. Initial inspection was carried out at Colt by British inspectors, but the proofing was done at Enfield. The core marking is the British military proof, represented by crossed pennants. Small broad arrows often abound, as do Enfield inspector stamps. Bluing can vary fairly widely on these. It depends on Colt's process at the time. They could be a fairly fine blue, or you may see the Black Army dark finish of later 1918. Many, however, were refinished later on in service, so it's a bit of a mixed bag what you might find today. It seems that these pistols were initially favored by the Royal Naval Air Service. Then some were acquired by the Royal Horse Artillery, another force that had standardized on 4.55 auto. But after the US entry into the war, the negotiations include evidence that they were the preferred weapon of the Royal Flying Corps. That is, until it merged with the RNAS in April of 1918, resulting in the Royal Air Force. It's not surprising that many of these pistols were thereafter marked RAF. These guns should have the serial number stamped on their magazines as well, but we rarely find that in collector circles. Now, the Colt 4.55 automatic pistol became the preferred handgun for the RAF and would remain in service all the way through World War II. Alright, so that covers Argentina, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Who else was buying these things? Well, in June of 1915, Norway purchased 400. Another 300 followed in May of 1917, but that's probably a story for another day. That's because, unlike the others in today's episode, Norway didn't just bumble into the 1911 or have to buy it under the pressure of war. They were actually trialing the Colt prototype for years beforehand and ultimately chose to not only adopt the 1911, but to also begin domestic manufacture. I think that there is more than enough meat on that bone to allow for a separate episode, so we'll see it next time. Skipping Norway, who's up next? Well, it's France, who purchased 5,000 1911s in November of 1915. These would have been, again, standard commercial production and would have shipped in January of 1916, again from the civilian series. They also supposedly received 500 pistols straight from US stores. These could have actually likely been Springfield made. I'm unsure if those counted towards the 5,000 unit contract. To be honest, I haven't found much in the way of primary sources on French 1911s. Word of mouth says that they were destined for the tank crewmen, but I find it a little more likely that they were intended for artillery or aviation. A handful of examples have also turned up with cutaways for a very specific wire stock. This is supposedly of French origin, but again, I've never laid hands on the documents to prove it. While I'm sure they found it serviceable, it appears that France didn't make much effort to acquire more 1911s. Likely they favored streamlining their acquisitions from Spain, as this allowed them to standardize on a single automatic cartridge. So what's up next? Well, frankly, all of the aforementioned countries pale in comparison to the number 2 purchaser of Colt's government model of 1911 automatic pistol, Russia, who had actually been considering this handgun even before the war started. The Tsar's forces had actually long been fans of Browning products. Starting in 1907, Russian officers had been given permission to purchase several automatic pistols. The Luger in 9mm Parabellum, the FN 1903 in 9mm Browning, and the FN 1900 in 32 ACP. Even FN's Vest pistol in 25 ACP was approved for wearing when off duty. Over time, other small automatics would be added to this list, but from the start we see a fondness for Browning's expertise. Once the 1911 pistol was ready, an example was provided to the Russian army, who in limited testing found it excellent, recommending it for further trials. They attempted to order 2 more samples, but something got lost in translation. They were very disappointed to find that 2 Colt 1909 45 caliber revolvers appeared instead of their automatic pistols. They tried again in November of 1912 with more success. Meanwhile, during 1913, momentum was building against the Nagant revolver. It was clearly time to make the jump to an autoloading pistol like so many other countries had. However, it seemed that Russia's domestic inventors had not provided a satisfactory replacement, nor was the industry quite capable of making a high-quality automatic handgun. So they had to keep looking abroad. Yes, the 1911 is nice, but what else is out there? Now remember, Colt and FN had split the global market, and since FN had access to Browning's patents, they too worked up their own version of the 1911. This was a 9.65mm pistol developed primarily from the 1910, including the use of the notch and pin grip plates, which abandoned the need for any screws. The safety and lack of a pin plate are more in line with the 1911 though. Forgotten Weapons actually has a video on this abandoned concept if you'd like to see it in more detail. The FN Grand Browning and the Colt Government Model were put head-to-head in Russian trials during 1914, and the Belgian example was preferred. Russia began plans to order 50 examples, but the start of the Great War intervened dramatically. Belgium was of course overrun by Germany, and FN was no longer going to provide pistols. Russian shortages during the war were extremely severe. Yes, the empire was large, and they could call more men to service than just about any other power, but they were well behind in matters of industrial development. Domestic production of arms was dated and somewhat inflexible. There was no real commercial industry to use as a backup to those government arsenals. Russian Minister of War Alexei Polivanov went so far as to record in his diary during the summer of 1915, "Rifles are now more precious than gold." It was estimated that at this point, Russia had upwards of 1 million men who lacked small arms of any sort. Now, wisely, the machine gun was prioritized. These were ordered wherever they could be found, usually adapted for their 7.62 cartridge. Interestingly, one such source was Colt's patent firearms, who sold them the Colt 1895-14, often called by its nickname, the Potato Digger. Even as machine guns were being secured, they had to go looking for the infantryman's best friend, the rifle. Some of these would be found in the US commercial market, like Remington and Westinghouse's production of their own Mosin 1891 rifle. There was also the adoption of a modified Winchester 1895 lever-action rifle. Pistols were, for a moment, something of a tertiary concern. However, Russia would soon learn that the same lessons that everyone else was seeing, that the handgun was fast becoming a critical tool in modern warfare. The combination of trench warfare along with the rise in specialty roles like machine gunners, drivers, etc. led to increased demand for the handgun. This was far past what was expected when they were just handed out to officers. In November of 1915, a Russian commission was dispatched to London, led by Admiral Alexander Rusin, who oversaw their numerous goals, both strategic and material. One facet of this mission was the acquisition of 1 million pistols, as well as hopefully 250 rounds for each. Unfortunately, this was an impossibility. The arms market was already running full tilt. The massive expansion projects that we'll see for later in the war had just begun. Back in November of 1914, the Bank of England had opened a line of credit for Russia, which was staked on a 2/3 security in gold. Recall that JP Morgan loan of $500 million for England and France we mentioned earlier? Well, again, gold was a useful security, and England asked Russia if they wouldn't mind helping in that matter. Russia consented to relinquish some gold on the condition of additional credit for their own purchases. Further negotiations saw further credit extensions to Russia if they allowed the British government to act as their purchasing agent in the US. This would help avoid competition between the two countries in the commercial market, thereby driving up prices and making it difficult with pockets of scarcity. So in January of 1916, the British government placed an order for 100,000 Colt 1911s for Russia. All of them were taken from commercial production and would therefore have C prefix serials. The only distinguishing feature of a Russian contract piece, aside from the shipping paperwork, is a little mark on the left side of the frame of the pistol. A slight abbreviation of the words English order, or perhaps we could say English contract. Again, a nod to the British procurement. This may have also been a saving grace for Colt's patent firearms, because their pre-British Russian contracts used Russian inspection teams, and they were aggressive. The 1911s seemed to carry on much easier. Most of these were delivered by British shipping. They would arrive at either Archangel or Murmansk. That is until the Russian government collapsed. Of the 100,000 unit order, only 51,000 would ship between February of 1916 and January of 1917. Russian sources seem to record only 47,100 pistols received. This may represent a gap lost in transportation or during the upheavals beginning in February. Strikes and later riots led to open revolt. The Tsar abdicated and was later arrested with his family. What came next was frankly utter confusion, especially from an international point of view. In May of 1917, the US extended millions in credit to the Provisional Government of Russia, but it was facing Bolshevik opposition at home following the October Revolution of 1917. After which the Entente backed what became the White Army in the Russian Civil War, so the US credits were canceled and of course no further shipments were made. It's interesting to note that the undelivered weapons piled up on Russian docks became the excuse for the Allied intervention in Russia in 1918. All this is really to say that as it served in Russia, the 1911 wasn't just wielded against the Austrians and Germans, it was also a tool of the Civil War, and beyond that remained in issue with the Soviet Union. It's even noted that Colts were in the hands of Stalin's guards in the 1930s. Russia's respect for the 1911 seems to have carried on even longer, as they would later adopt a Browning-locked semi-automatic pistol that combined features from the FN 1903 and the Colt 1911, and interestingly, the Mauser C96. Okay, we're nearly there, I promise. I just have two very minor shipments to mention. In February of 1917, the Netherlands purchased 50 pistols, and 302 were sent along to the Philippine government in May of that same year. Neither require much consideration, though, for our episode today. Alright, with all of that locked in, we can finally ask May if the Colt 455 is enough to be considered rounding up to 46. Alright, once again, we've made room for May.
We have.
And we have another smattering of pistols.
Oh, that is truly a smattering.
Now, only one of these is truly not like the others.
Let me see. Hold on.
Oh, God.
Whoa. Ooh, okay, yeah, there is a bit of a touch difference there.
Which one's chambered in 455 based off of your touching?
Based off my touching?
Yeah.
I'm going to say far left.
It's also the only one with the lanyard ring on this magazine.
Dead giveaway.
I have no idea if the original Argentines came with a lanyard ring. I don't even remember if I covered that in this episode yet.
I think you actually... I don't know if you talked about it in this episode or not, because we film these in batches.
This is actually... So
this is one of
let's
two.
start with that. This is a Colt Wartime US. This is a Colt, I guess you technically... Well, this one's wartime. The first contract for Argentina would have been slightly before the war.
Sure.
And in both of those regards, I cannot find anything that says definitively whether or not they had lanyards on the magazine. Which is weird because I found people mentioning that they found serialized magazines, but then they don't mention whether they had lanyards or not.
Huh.
And Argentine research is weird. I've been kind of doing some work on the revolver side for that too, and it's weird to dig information out of there.
Weird or difficult? Because I feel like you're saying weird, and that unfortunately doesn't really describe what's going on.
They don't. It's not necessarily all gathered together by somebody yet because no one else has done the groundwork.
Okay.
And communication can be odd into that area. And Bruno, our animator, is actually from there.
Right.
And so occasionally I ask him to help me wade in on it. And then it feels like we always end up with weird crossed wires and drop balls whenever we try to talk with anybody down there. So if anybody has a good hookup in Argentina, let me know. Because I do have some...
That would be
I have
fascinating.
some big pre-1900s questions for Argentina. But that's a separate issue. So this is just, the Argentinian that we have is fairly worn, refinished... original, wartime production Colt commercial model.
Sure. And coincidentally, it's the only one I actually haven't shot out of all the 1911s on the table.
Yes. But realistically, it's going to shoot exactly the same as our government model 1911 U.S. contract brushed blue that we used in our 1911 episode.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the French contracts are going to shoot exactly like that one.
Cool.
The Russian contracts are going to shoot exactly like this one.
Fancy that.
The pre-455 British stuff that was sold over... It's the same gun.
Right.
What's going to be different in this case is the 455 auto.
Different cartridge.
Was created for this gun.
Right. Webley self-loader.
U.S. and Britain were the two big countries that said, we're sticking with big bore before the war. And The Webley is sort of a technicality. It's very odd. It's almost like a native design that hung in there and proved itself enough to lock the door on foreign contracts.
Right.
And as part of that, it created it created a cartridge that was a weird hybridization of their revolver cartridge and an automatic cartridge, but not really.
And this is the Enfield cartridge, right?
No. It'd be like, oh God, it's vaguely related to like a Webley 455 is what you'd think of in the general audience. Mm-hmm. But realistically, it's a longer case cartridge than 45 auto or ACP in the US.
Sure.
And then it has like a little bit of a rim to it. Mm-hmm. Just a semi-rimmedness, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those critical dimensions didn't seem to upset this pistol, but there was a severe risk that it could have upset something like that 1911 automatic.
Right.
However, when the 1911 was constructed, there was thankfully enough room in the gun. I have no idea if that was intentional or not, actually, because Colt still kind of kept a loose eye on the British market, and being able to leave enough meat that you could sort of hog it out and get a 4.55 auto in there wouldn't be the worst idea. But
because they barely had to do any tweaks on this guy, right, in order to make it fit the 4.55 cartridge.
Yeah, just some carving of the magazine well and structure of the magazine, and then a little relief inside the chamber area of the barrels.
Pretty cool. There was room to do that.
Right. I think it was accidental, though.
Yeah.
It's not impossible that it was a consideration, but because this would have been known as they were going into it, that these were sort of the way things were going. But at best, if it was intentional, it would have been we're going to leave just a little bit of extra room in case for foreign contract.
Okay.
But I kind of doubt they did it. It feels like the 1911 was fairly min-maxed onto 45 ACP, and it just lucked out that there was enough room to be able to fit the 4.55 auto.
Cool.
And then that means that this is really our only different gun today. I'm sorry, this is kind of a rehash, but
yeah. So this is the different one, right? So it should feel different in a lot of ways then.
Okay, everything excluding the gun going off.
Okay.
Is there a perceivable difference between that and one of these Colt commercials or like a Colt U.S. government?
You know, Matthias is actually pretty good in that when it came to these 1911s, he was like, I want you to be able to really feel those tiny differences, right? So he went, we're going to shoot them all as close to each other as we can time-wise so that you get the real feel and the understanding of them. So we shot almost all of them in one day. We shot a few weeks later and had them all covered, right? We were good.
We also did sampling of several rounds.
Yeah, we did.
If they couldn't be filmed together and we knew we were going to have a direct comparison, it's like, hey, put 3 rounds through this now that you just filmed that. Mm-hmm.
And just to kind of see. And that's a pretty good idea. I can honestly say there's no difference in feel. There really isn't. No. Like I honestly, pulling the trigger doesn't feel any different. The grip safety really doesn't feel like there's any difference in the spring. I mean, maybe that could be the springs, could be slightly different, but that could be wear. That might not be the springs in this guy versus them.
No, as a matter of fact, we've managed to, in the time since we filmed the 1911 episode, we managed to change the feel on the 1911 we filmed.
The brush blue, yes, we did.
Because immediately after we filmed that episode, it started having hammer follow. Mm-hmm. And I went, ugh. So I went ahead and dropped a new combination spring in the back, which cleaned up the hammer follow because it was a sear tension problem.
Right.
Which immediately changed the trigger feel.
Yeah, it made the trigger feel a little bit stiffer.
Yeah. And so all of these pistols, well, not this guy. This isn't a 1911.
No, that's not it.
All of these guys, especially coming from the same manufacturer, are going to be right in line with each other, so tight that you're barely going to be able to feel a difference.
Right. And I wish I could say that I felt a difference, but I even checked my notes on myself because I leave meticulous notes at the end of the shoot stays to kind of see. There's nothing there. I just was talking to myself saying there's no difference. I don't know what I'm going to do when we go to talk about these.
Okay, so the one thing that is keyly distinct is the 4.55 cartridge.
Yes, it's got a different cartridge.
So once that firing pin hits that primer and it goes bang, that is the biggest difference between those two handguns.
I'm ready. There was no difference. I couldn't perceive it. I tried real hard, guys. We shot the high speed multiple times to try to kind of just even see visually if there was a difference.
Let's give it the overlay. You ready? Okay, here's our 45 auto.
Well, I don't know if we shot them at the same angle.
No. The overlay of the ammo. The ammo.
Oh, the ammo overlay. Okay.
Here's your dimensions for 45 ACP, right?
Okay.
And then here's your dimensions for 4.55 auto. Now, those might seem distinct to a degree, but not very perceptible. And during wartime, with the rushed ammunition that was being manufactured, I bet that either could swing this way or the other.
Right, they could have easily overlapped in some areas.
So despite critical dimensional differences for someone who's trying to mill a handgun, there's no perceivable difference.
Nah, I thought, weirdly, I thought the only thing might be was that I might feel like the grip was a little girthier because I know they had to make the mags a little bit, wider.
Yes, but that was an internal cut.
Right, that's what I found out, and I went, oh, maybe that's going to feel wider. Oh, no, wait, that feels the same. Oh, it's only internal. I'm not going to feel jack then.
No, it's distinctly the same as a 1911. You'd never know that you were shooting the 4.55 auto, except for the part where you had to hand load that crap like we do.
Yeah, that's pretty much the only difference.
But with that being said, we do have another comparison we can make while we're here.
Okay.
Which is...
Another 1911.
No, that's next episode.
Okay.
We do have a comparison in the sense that the British ultimately ended up with 2 automatic pistols chambering the same cartridge during World War I, and May has fired both of those pistols.
I have.
So, let's put this back in your hand. The Webley...
This is since episode 61 or something.
This is the Mark I Naval.
Yep.
And technically adopted before the war, saw limited use. You want that heel release, right?
God, yep.
So between these 2 pistols, would you like to give sort of a brief summary of which you would prefer and why?
Ergonomically, this one's so much friendlier.
Is it?
For the human hand, yes. For an alien hand, this could work.
How does it point? How does it point?
Well, the problem is that, okay, so this one, it kind of is...
It points down.
It does point down. It does kind of want to point down. And then on top of that, the grip feel is awkward thanks to that unusually bulbous grip safety here in the back. It doesn't even work that well with the human hand by comparison.
You know what's kind of funny about the grip safety on the Webley self-loader?
What?
It reminds me of the bulge in the mainspring housing from a 1911 A1, which we haven't covered yet. But it's got that palm swell, but it's on the safety.
But it's also, it's really kind of contoured gently. This one's just like, hey, did you want a safety? They're really putting it out there. They're really showing it out.
Okay, so the grip is too straight.
The grip is definitely too straight.
The grip safety's weirder.
Yep. Heel releases, I'm not a big fan of them. I will say the button on this one is pretty positive. However...
You can snag it on that second position.
You can snag it on that second position. I did remember that.
But remember, we have to put that there so that you can single load the pistol for when you're training.
And I remember recoil on this one kind of felt... snappier, I want to say.
To be fair, we'd have to review footage. That we didn't shoot alongside, so...
No, we did not. It's
a little unfair to compare the two.
Time.
What about the sights, though?
Sights themselves? Weird. Yeah. They're still kind of, unfortunately, not as good as the 1911.
They're so big, though.
I don't understand. All of this material on the outside, completely not necessary. Are you just trying to block my vision, for that section?
No, what they're doing is, the theory at the time...
To draw your eyes in?
Yes, the 1911 did the same thing. They wanted to create a horizon.
Yeah.
That was a clear divide, because you're looking at something, on a pistol, you're looking further away than a rifle, right? It's at full extension.
I mean, to be fair, if you were to take the 1911 gun and widen it out to the same width of the Webley self-loader, it'd be pretty close in terms of the shape of that sight picture.
Yeah, it's just like it's scaled up like it's closer to you.
I think I'm going to do that in Photoshop and see if it's pretty close.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, when we did the 1911, they actually started with a more rounded rear sight, and they said, no, we need to flatten this off to create this plane. And human eyes are good at seeing flat horizon. It's true. And so the problem is you are here, and they were one-handing it. Right. And this thing's far away, and you need to focus on this little tiny dot, And so the idea was to give you something that when you tunnel vision on it, you can pick up the horizon of the rear sight easier. And so a longer, flatter rear sight gave you more of a chance to quickly find the rear sight, and especially the rear sight notch. And so that was a distinct advantage. And in this regard, the Webley's is huge. I mean, the sight on the Webley is one of the largest automatic pistol sights I think we've seen in this show.
It has to be, yeah. There's no way anything's bigger.
When you go ahead and quick point it, I don't know, the doorknob over there or something.
Ooh, still wants to tip down low.
Okay. But how quickly did you pick up the sights?
I mean, unfortunately, not as quick as I would have liked, but still pretty quick by comparison.
Now try the 1911. You got to do it left-handed. Don't cheat.
I just did it. Yeah, okay. Ready?
Yeah.
It's way faster. It's because I think the 1911... I don't know why. I think this front sight fits better with the rear sight on this one as far as lining up the front half moon with the rear.
I mean, you're working non-dominant now, which is even weirder, so...
Which is what I picked up.
Yeah, I know, but I'm telling you, you're the most disadvantaged, and you still say the 1911 was clearer to read. So that's a pretty good indication that it was clearer to read to you.
For me, yes.
Okay, I'm trying to get a point on the board for the self-loader. I tell you what, I know one thing, and this harkens to our next episode.
Okay.
I defy you to tell me that the slide release is easier on the 1911 than it is on the Webley self-loader.
I mean, that is a pretty convenient button. That's a pretty good little button right there.
It's the easiest slide release. How about that?
Yeah, it really is. It sticks out pretty far, and honestly, there's no risk of me accidentally bumping it because of how it lips up so that your thumb fits right underneath it. I can't see you trying to lip over. If you tried to lip over the top of the button,
you can't ride it by accident.
You'd end up getting caught by the slide. You get some serious slide bite with that, I bet.
It's pretty flat-sided. I think you could let it ride alongside.
Maybe.
Wouldn't be the best way to hold it, but you could.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
But no, you're not wrong. That button is a little more positive for the Webley self-loader. However...
Also, the Webley self-loader doesn't have a manual safety right there.
No, it doesn't.
So it's much more like the modern Glock. They got rid of manual safeties now, so that's more advanced than the 1911.
It's more advanced. No, but the fortunate thing is that there really there's no real else otherwise positive could think of that would put it over a 1911.
Okay, so the slight negatives aside, you're choosing the Webley self-loader.
No.
Okay, we're going with the 1911?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm saying.
You know.
Look, we got to talk about something, folks. Otherwise, it's the same as what it was before.
Yeah, unfortunately, this one was going to be a shorter one in terms of the comparisons.
If you had to draw one from memory and you were awarded money for drawing it better than everybody else...
I'd still probably do the 1911 better, simply because I've seen more.
I'd go with rectangle gun.
I mean, if you asked a 5-year-old to draw them after seeing them for a few seconds, yeah, rectangle gun would probably win.
Yeah, British rectangle gun. Anyway, I think that's really about it.
Pretty much.
I'm not used to having so little to say, but we're also in the middle of 1911 Arama. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure y'all aren't sick of them yet or at all.
We have one more.
Yes.
Everybody's asking me, are we going to do the A1? No. There's going to be a break now because there's only so much I can stand. And then we can talk about A1 and A1 derivative guns.
We will get to them.
I know, having brought up the Argentine, we're going to get Modelo 27 stuff. That's post A1.
Yep.
So just hold on.
Look forward to all of that.
Take your hands and sit on them because we got other stuff to do, all right?
Yeah, we were the All Martini channel, all 1911. We need to be something else for a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we have some people to thank for this episode.
We do.
So to start it off, let's talk about the people that made it directly possible, who loaned into this episode, which means that we have to thank our friend Brandon again.
Oh, yes, Brandon.
Thank
you.
Our very own animator, Bruno.
I know. He lent us his beautiful Argentine.
And, of course, we have to thank Mr. Clear once more.
Yes, Mr. Clear has been a repeat offender for lending us all those wonderful pieces.
I know. What a horrible, darling man. And, of course, we have our executive producers. They don't appear on every episode, but they appear on some because these are people who have chosen to go above and beyond and donate specifically to this episode. They want to see the work get done. They're willing to support us, and they know that the tax man cometh for us all.
He do.
So,
especially here.
I'll start today's short list off with Tom Batha.
Yes, thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah, we once again are happy to have your support, and we really appreciate you helping us get the work done.
He's also a repeat offender like Mr. Clear.
Also, we have Brian Ingram.
Yes, we do. Brian, thank you, man.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Again, can't do it without you.
Definitely could not.
And our semi-permanent executive producer, who I'm going to have to find something nicer to do for, I just haven't thought of it yet, is Andy Wade.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, for being a major supporter of the content you all are receiving for hopefully free. At least more than 9/10 of you are.
Yeah, he paid us the wonderful compliment of saying we're so much like PBS that he wanted us to make sure that we kept going.
He's like, I love PBS. I know they won't let you in there, so...
They will not. They will not.
All right. Well, with all that covered, we hope you'll join us again next time. I guess I'll just go ahead and give it away. We got a funky Scandinavian 1911.
Oh, yeah.